I was number 16, I think, 16 or 17, 15. I got a little sister in the house, and I told you I was whatever. Anyway, my folks, my dad died and left 6 minor kids at home, and 2 in college. When he died, they dropped out. So we never, the 6 of us left, never heard anything about education, except Mama would say, you gotta go to school. I dropped out, but the time I dropped out was about the time the EOP programs came in. And I came out to California, and I went to school. I didn't have counseling to go to college, but I went to college. I went to UC Berkeley, and I graduated in 2 years Phi Beta Kappa.
Yay!
That's not bragging. That is to say the potential of our people out there. And if we don't keep public education viable for them, we're doing them a great disservice, because it is truly the equalizer. And it is truly one of the things that the NAACP should never lose sight of, because we're in this business. If you want to eliminate poverty, you want people to have a fair chance in America, you want them to enter the market system if they want to, they have to have education. We're now in a global market, and they have to be able to compete. So this work of this task force is one of the most important things I've been able to do since I've been in the NAACP, and we're not finished. So what we're going to do, we have issued a report. The report is not making everybody happy, but it made us happy, because it's our job to tell the truth. And so we have some truth tellers here, and you will hear from each task force member on a couple of components, and then I will sum it up, and then we got some work for you to do. So don't jump up and leave out of the room, because we don't want this to be a report that sits on the shelf. We want it activated. And who's gonna activate it? You. We can't do it, we've done what we can do, you're gonna have to do the rest. So ladies and gentlemen, please bear with us as each task force member has a part in the program that they would like to present to you. You heard Scott Esdell. Scott, you wanna make another comment or two?
One thing I would just like to...
I have a feeling out there, at least, I know in certain communities, that charter schools are the magic bullet to fix everything. Fixing the public schools where they are failing our children is a hard, complex issue, and we can't get distracted by the fact that maybe if we just do this one thing called charter schools, we can then walk away and that's the end of it. The title of the task force does not have the words charter schools in it. The title of the task force is the Task Force on Quality Education, and that's what we have to focus on. Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Gloria Jean Sweetlove, and despite what they've told you the last couple of days, I am from Brownsville, Tennessee.
All right.
And I am president of the NAACP State Conference of Units in Tennessee. And as president, we held the second hearing in Memphis, Tennessee. And we were thrilled to host a special event, a distinguished panel of educators, administrators, elected officials, and others. Throughout the 7 hearings, we learned a lot about charter schools, and I want to talk to you a little bit about who authorized charter schools, because who authorized them really does make the difference. Charter schools are approved and certified by authorizers. School district or state can authorize the contract for charter schools to open. Some states and cities have multiple authorizers, and it can lead to confusion about their role and responsibility. In Detroit, they told us, in Michigan, they've got about 53 authorizers. 43 states and the District of Columbia have different approaches for overseeing charter schools, varying in who can serve as the authorizer. Some college, sometimes it's the Education Commission, but who can really serve? States with the fewest authorizers have found to have the strongest charter school outcomes. One of the things we talked about, and we feel like it's so important, it's important for there to be transparency and accountability. if you've got 53 authorizers, you're really not accountable to anybody. In the state of Tennessee, local education associations authorize charter schools. And that means that those schools are accountable to the school board members and therefore to the parents and the people in the community. So as you look at our report, look at this specific thing, because we felt like it was important who authorized us. And it's important for us as advocates to stand up and try to get laws changed, because the children are depending on us.
Good morning. My name is Adora Obi Aweze, and I serve as president of the Florida State Conference. Our state held the next hearing after Tennessee. I'd like to take a few moments to talk to you about governance. How are charter schools governed? What are the key points and the key elements in them providing the kind of governance that would certainly allow them to stay in their own lane of governing as opposed to getting involved in the curriculum and the day-to-day operation. So the role of a governing body certainly is quite different. During the Orlando hearing, the issue of charter governance was raised by several speakers. As president of the conference, we have fought for more transparency and oversight on the various governance structures. And I want to add that the governance structures are really a mixed bag all through this country. It's so complicated. When you do your research, you will be researching all night and then some, and not be finished. Every charter school is required by law to have a board of directors that is ultimately responsible for what the school does. Charter school governance structures vary. The most common model of charter school board governance might be thought of as a combination between school districts, Board of Education, without local elected officials, and nonprofit boards, though not generally private. Legally, the board oversees the operation of the school and makes sure it is fiscally sound and follows the state law. The state law will make sure that charter schools, according to what we have found, that will make sure that charter schools stick to what is written, so they do monitor that. Charter schools are public schools, like traditional public schools, but they are funded according to enrollment, also called average daily attendance, or ADA, and receive funding from the local school district and the state according to the number of students attending. In some states, charter schools are required to be not-for-profit and abide by open record record laws during the charter board meetings. Charter schools are subject to fewer rules, regulations, and statutes than traditional public schools are. Charter schools' governing bodies are often subject to various business regulations, such as ethical fiscal practices, open meeting laws, and like all public school districts, must have an annual independent financial audit in accordance with state laws. In addition to their boards, charter schools also have oversight of their authorizers, which can be the local school board, county office, or education or state board of education.
Good morning.
Yay!
My name is Hazel Dukes, president of the NAACP New York State Conference. But I would be remiss if I didn't own my birthplace, which is Montgomery, Alabama.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man.
And I say that because education has been one of the priorities in my life after adult. All my family members teachers at Alabama State broke the barrier of becoming the first African-American superintendent in Montgomery, Alabama. So education, and so the chairman, Mr. Russell, who I've worked with over 20 years, know that I have fought this association to make education a priority. I brought 3 lawsuits under, one was when Ben Hooks was the executive director, and then the last 2 under Ben Jealous, and I must say, at that time I had full support of the NAACP.
Amen.
Ben Jealous came into New York and stayed 2 months daily with the education staff at that time there. They came in because we brought suits against the city of New York on charter schools.
Amen.
And small class sizes.
Amen.
While I first started my education in a segregated school in Montgomery, Alabama, I had a good foundation for education.
Amen.
I did not go to an HBC, unfortunately. For my undergrad, all of my undergrad, I started at Alabama State.
Amen.
So I know when teachers, when administrators care for children, regardless to what setting, what zip code, or what side of the track they live on, we can educate our children.
Amen.
And so, I host the last hearing of the task force in New York City. It was fantastic because we too, like all of the states, brought together experts on both sides of the issue, as Peter said. We worked hard to make sure that we heard from charter schools, that we heard from parents who had experienced what had happened. And so I want to spend a few minutes talking about transparency and accountability. Just before I left, and I sent, I believe, to all of the task force members, a young lady was to be the valedictorian at a charter school. And some kids went out and scribbled on the wall. Her mother was called to say the child could not be the valedictorian because of this behavior she had had. We have that school in a suit because the parent filed a suit with our Board of Education. There's no rules set for how you discipline children in a charter school. There's no transparency. But in the public school, it's written, it's documented,
Yes,
it's
Lord.
a policy.
Yes, Lord.
So, the extent of which charter schools are financially accountable and transparent varies, as Mrs. Sweetlove said. In Memphis, when we were there, we heard that in Memphis, Tennessee, they have a charter law, requires annual audit, academic achievement reports, and financial management review are required. That's not what happened in New York. It's so big they named it twice. But it should be big enough to make accountability for our children for learning. In Michigan, taxpayers pour nearly $1 billion a year into charter schools, but state laws regulate charters among the nation's weakest, and the state demand little accountability in how taxpayers' dollars are spent and how well children are educated. Can you imagine $1 billion of taxpayers' money and no one has to account for it? We in the NAACP cannot stand for that.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
In New Haven, a local school administrator said, no organization should get public money if they can't show how every penny is spent. That's what we are about.
Amen.
Charter school leaders around the country have fought against such public accountability and have gone to court to protect their rights not to disclose certain information, particular focused information. Now, who in the world would think that NAACP was against any kind of education? We are talking about accountability and transparency because we are taxpayers.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
At one hearing in New York, One charter leader raised concern about accountability. She said, and she was a charter school administrator, she said, in exchange for more accountability, we should have higher level of accountability and transparency. As noted in much of the testimony around the country, where charter schools have had less accountability, a variety of documents abuse have occurred. NAACP, I know that you, your children, your grandchildren, your nieces and your nephews, you want the best education for your children.
Absolutely.
They are our future. They will run the world. We won't have to say we had one African American president or one black president. We will have a pipeline of
Yes,
more
Lord.
presidents that we
Yes,
can
Lord.
fight for
Hallelujah.
education for
Yes.
all our children.
Yes, now you talk. Hazel, you always do well.
Good morning. My name is Daquan Love, and I have the distinct privilege of having served as a high school American history, civics, and sociology teacher in the second lowest performing school district in North Carolina, working in alumni affairs at one of our nation's most prestigious universities, Hampton University. Yes. And also serving as a founding teacher and now as a Dean of Scholar Achievement and Institutional Advancement at a public charter school in Minnesota. And so as we look at quality education, and I'm so glad that we utilize that name to describe our committee, our task force, I bring a very unique set of perspectives to this conversation. And you know what was most interesting as we traveled the country is that folks would always say, NAACP is so against charter schools. You don't know anything about charter schools. And then faces would turn when our chairman, Ms. Huffman, would say, oh, and Daquan, who's on our task force, is a charter school administrator. And so I think it's first off right that we set the record straight. Secondly, there are good charter schools that are doing phenomenal work in communities where, quite frankly, some of our public schools are not. And while we are focused on high quality public free education, educational institutions, our public schools, we cannot, listen, we cannot negate the good charter schools where there are teachers and administrators and community members who wake up early in the morning to get to school to ensure that those kids have a quality education. And so, to describe some of the good things that we heard and I personally can attest to, is that there are some charter schools who are living up to the original ideals of charter schools, which is being innovative. One of the charter schools that I've had the privilege of working with has an extended learning day where students come to school early, they get to school around 7 o'clock, and they're in school until almost 4:30. And during that extended learning time, they're given opportunities to get remedial help where they're needed. They're given opportunities to have gifted and talented programs, and we are meeting the needs of the scholars where they are. And so, having heard all of the testimony, we have concluded that while there definitely are some good charter schools in our country that are serving scholars well, and there's a reason why I'm saying scholars and not students, because a student is someone who walks into a classroom. A scholar is someone who is destined for greatness.
Right.
there are some problems with the operations of some charter schools across our country that truly require attention. Now, for some, the task force hearings provided a forum for charter proponents to argue that charters provided the answer to under-resourced neighborhood schools. And many parents look to charter schools to provide what they hope will be a higher quality education for their children. Now, I want to look at Minnesota. Let's talk about Minnesota, which is the state where we have many charter schools and a state in which charter schools originate. There are so many charter schools that you find that if the mother or the father don't like the teacher, instead of working it out, they just move to another charter school. And then in November, the child's at their second charter school and they don't like the lunch, and so they're moving to their third charter school. And we have students shuffling and shuffling and shuffling within our system, and who ultimately is failing? Our scholars.
Right.
That being said, choice does not have to be the answer to under-resourced neighborhood schools. What is the answer is resourcing those neighborhood schools. The claim that charter schools provide greater options for families was often countered by accounts of, and I saw this not in the charter school that I worked at, but actually when I worked in a public school in the South. And in that public school, in that particular district, there were two high schools, the district high school and the charter school. Where were our gifted and talented students? They were at the charter school. And when those students encountered issues, we found that they were quickly sent back to the public school. Now, state laws differ, and I think it's important for us to note that. Because in the state of Minnesota, when a child leaves school A to go to school B, the next time school B gets their allotment from the state, school B is going to get that money and school A is going to lose it. But in some states, child can be on school number 5 and school number 1 has had the money for that child the entire year. That is how we are undercutting the quality education that's going on in our public schools. If a child, every child has what's called per pupil funding, and the state allots it differently per, every state, and some districts supplement what the state provides. But funding should follow the student. Because if I am teaching at a public high school, and I've had 10 students, and this is true, come in November, and I'm just gonna put out a figure. Let's say that every child per pupil funding is $10,000, and you're now sending me, let's say, 5 students in November. That's $50,000 that public school was supposed to have and should have to hire teachers to fill those overcrowded classrooms, to have the academic, intellectual support resources for these students, especially those with special needs. And they don't have it because in some states funding does not follow the scholars. Let's talk about scholars with special needs. And many participants testified, and this is sad. This is sad. That some schools will, especially in some of the states where the per pupil funding does not travel with the child, some students will take on some students with special needs and quickly release them back to either a public school or another charter school and say, we cannot serve your child. We do not have the adequate support resources for your child. That's shameful. And it even happens with our gifted and talented scholars as well. Many participants testified about students who were perceived as poor test takers. I don't know if there have been several articles and reports that have been written, including ours, that talk about how we see charter schools that say, I have 100% graduation rate. Yes, you do. Because in March of that year, you sent that high school senior who you know was not going to graduate, who you know was not going to be accepted to college, back to the public school so that you could say that all of our scholars got accepted to college.
Right.
That is undercutting our scholars. That is telling lies. And ultimately, who is getting the short end of the stick? Our scholars. Students who have discipline issues are being excluded as well. So at the end of the day, there are good charter schools that are doing great work, and the NAACP wants to support high quality education, wherever that is. But we will demand transparency, accountability, governance, and we will hold these charter schools accountable. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
As was mentioned, I'm Michael Curry. I am the former president of the Boston branch of the NAACP and a member of the National Board of Directors. I am honored and privileged to be a part of this task force. As many in this room may know, Boston was ground zero for the charter school expansion movement. Massachusetts, there was a lawsuit filed to expand charter schools. There was a ballot question filed to expand charter schools. And the legislature was considering legislation to expand charter schools. So many of us on the local level, and particularly within the NAACP, across Massachusetts was engaged in the conversation of charter schools. And quality education is a broader topic. Credit to this task force that understood that this issue isn't just about charter schools. It's also about traditional public schools and the challenges that face our traditional public schools, that's creating a conversation about expanding charter schools. So what I wanted to say before we get into a little bit about the public schools, it's important to acknowledge that there are young activists challenging our public education systems right now.
Yeah.
There are two young ladies in this room that became a national story over the last year, and many of you may have read about them in national papers. Maggie Noel and Kylie Webster-Kazoo are two young women that after the non-indictment in the Michael Brown case decided to challenge their fellow students who were tweeting very racist things. That challenge went viral. It challenged the school, and ultimately there were cases that came out of that oldest public school in the nation, Boston Latin School, 1635, I think. They challenged that school, and there were eventually civil rights violations found against the oldest public school in the nation. And those two young ladies are here, Maggie Noel, Kylie Webster-Kazoo. Could you please stand up?
Amen. Amen. God bless. God bless.
And the reason I thought it was important to mention them in getting into this conversation is people think, and this was one of the biggest criticisms out of the resolution last year. The criticism came out that the NAACP, where were they at on all these issues in traditional public education? So they took a stance on this moratorium in charter schools, but where were you on the critical issues impacting most of our kids in traditional public education? That's a myth. The reality is there are branches and state conferences across this country that are in the legislatures, that are in the school committee hearings, that are challenging mayors and governors to do the right things for our kids right now. Many of you sitting in this audience, give yourselves a round of applause.